My parents, with their insidious and relentless manipulation, systematically gaslit me, eroding my perception of reality until I genuinely believed my sister, Millie, was losing her mind, painting her as erratic and unstable. Why did they do this? To control us, to isolate her, to prevent us from recognizing their own toxic behavior. It took an act of terrifying, near-fatal violence from my own father, an incident so horrific it shook me to my core, for the thick veil of deception to finally lift. It was only then, when my very life was on the line, that I truly began to see the truth, a truth that had been deliberately obscured by years of parental manipulation and psychological warfare. In that moment of absolute terror and vulnerability, it wasn't my parents, the supposed protectors, who stepped in. It was Millie, my crazy sister, who stood as the sole, unwavering sentinel, bravely interposing herself between me and the monstrous rage of our father. Literally fighting for my survival when everyone else, including me, was either frozen in fear or actively complicit in my subjugation. As the youngest child, perpetually overshadowed and conditioned within that oppressive household, I instinctively learned to shrink myself, to become practically invisible. My existence was meticulously sculpted by the pervasive fear of incurring parental wrath, a fear intensified by the constant cautionary tale that was Millie. I molded myself into the quintessential quiet child, a shadow, a presence that only dared to utter a word when directly addressed. Because the absolute last thing I ever wanted was to mirror my older sister Millie, her defiance, her assertiveness, her very spirit of rebellion, which, in my parents' warped narrative, was the root of all chaos. When my father's volatile temper would inevitably erupt, unleashing torrents of verbal or physical abuse upon me or my brother, Evan, Millie was the only one who couldn't, or wouldn't, simply look away. Unlike the rest of us, who had perfected the art of feigned indifference or cowering silence, she possessed an unwavering moral compass, a fierce refusal to tacitly endorse injustice by remaining quiet. Her silence, she seemed to understand, would be complicity. I vividly recall one particular incident, a vacation to the sun-drenched, seemingly idyllic landscape of Florida, which quickly devolved into another chilling tableau of our family's dysfunction. I was a slender 12-year-old, awkwardly navigating the precipice of adolescence, clad in a pair of casual jean shorts. My brother, Evan, was 13, just a year older, and Millie, ever the watchful older sister, was 15, already keenly aware of the undercurrents of tension that perpetually coursed through our family interactions. What should have been a carefree moment turned sinister in an instant. My dad, with a chillingly casual air, delivered a light, almost dismissive slap to my thigh. "You're getting fat," he pronounced, his words cutting through the air like a razor, instantly igniting a spark of shame and self-consciousness within my young mind. The irony, the sheer cruelty of it, was palpable. I was a US size 2, barely more than skin and bone, yet his words carried the crushing weight of an incontrovertible truth in my impressionable world. In that moment of profound humiliation, my eyes instinctively darted to Millie, a silent, desperate plea in my gaze. "Don't you dare say anything. Don't make it worse." And for a fleeting moment, she seemed to heed my silent warning, her expression tightening but her lips remaining sealed. But then, the situation escalated. My dad, emboldened by my silence and Millie's temporary restraint, reached out, a crude, possessive gesture, and tugged at the hem of my shorts. His voice laced with an undeniable insinuation as he commanded me, "Cover that up." The implication was clear, repulsive, and utterly dehumanizing. That was the breaking point. The veneer of calm, of forced compliance, shattered around Millie. Her eyes, which moments before had held a silent warning, now blazed with a fierce indignation. "What the F did Dad just say?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence, challenging the very air we breathed. She didn't address Dad directly. Instead, she turned to our mother, as if seeking an explanation, a justification for his outrageous behavior. But Mom, ever the enabler, was already trying to shush her, her whispered pleas of "Millie, stop it. Just shut up," only fueling Millie's righteous anger. And then, as if on cue, a collective venomous chorus erupted. Suddenly, the entire roomy mother, my brother, and even me, the very victim Millie was defending, turned on her. Our voices merged into a cacophony of accusation, a furious barrage of shouts and condemnations. "You're such a troublemaker. Why do you always have to cause problems? Can't you just let things be?" We screamed at her, our words designed to crush her spirit, to force her back into subservience, to uphold the distorted peace of our dysfunctional family. Now, with the clarity of hindsight, a searing wave of regret washes over me, a bitter taste in my mouth at my own complicity. Of course, I regret it, profoundly. But in that moment, in the suffocating reality of our household, I was utterly brainwashed. My parents, master manipulators, had skillfully woven a narrative that warped right and wrong, convincing me and my siblings that their abusive behavior wasn't just acceptable, but somehow their right, even their responsibility. They had us believing that their outbursts were mere disciplinary actions, a necessary evil for our own good. In their twisted logic, the only thing that truly caused an issue wasn't the abuse itself, but the unforgivable sin of speaking back, of daring to challenge their authority. The ripple effects of that moment didn't end with Millie's outburst and our collective condemnation. Oh no, the toxic dance merely shifted partners. That's when Evan, my brother, resorted to the only defense mechanism he had learned in our abusive environment. He wasn't like Millie, overtly defiant. Instead, he plastered a carefully constructed, almost boyish smirk onto his face, a mask of studied nonchalance. It was a performance, a desperate, silent declaration that he simply didn't give an F about anything our dad did or said, a desperate attempt to appear impervious, detached, and therefore, safe. His subtle act of defiance, however, was quickly perceived and swiftly punished. Before I could even process the shift, the full force of our father's volcanic rage redirected itself from Millie to Evan. Suddenly, Dad was bellowing at Evan, his voice shaking the very foundations of the house, his threats escalating from mere words to thinly veiled promises of physical violence. The air crackled with tension, pregnant with the terrifying possibility of another physical confrontation. That night, a silent, profound act of protection unfolded. Millie, despite being the target of our collective anger just hours before, quietly slipped into the bed with Evan and me. She positioned herself protectively around Evan, a fragile human shield, her body an unspoken promise to intercede, to absorb any blow, should our father, in a fit of alcohol-fueled rage or simmering resentment, decide to unleash his fury upon Evan in the dead of night. It was a stark reminder of her unwavering loyalty, even when we had betrayed her. Unfortunately, that momentary solace was but a fleeting respite. As the years inexorably marched on, the darkness in our household deepened, and things, far from improving, only spiraled further into a harrowing abyss of emotional and psychological torment. I often think back to Evan, to the boy he once was. He used to be such a sweet, gentle soul, full of youthful kindness. I remember vividly how he would tenderly tuck Millie and me into a warm blanket whenever we drifted off to sleep on the living room couch. His soft whispers assuring us that we were pretty, his innocent words a stark contrast to the harsh realities of our home. He was a protector, a source of comfort, a beacon of simple affection. But the corrosive influence of our father's escalating abuse slowly, relentlessly, began to warp him. Like a virulent disease, the anger and cruelty seeped into Evan, transforming him from that tender boy into a hardened, resentful shell. By the time he reached the cusp of adulthood at 16, he had become a chilling echo of our father, just another angry, embittered man festering within the confines of our troubled home. His once bright spirit extinguished by the pervasive toxicity. Yet through all the escalating chaos and the creeping corruption, Millie, remarkably, never lost that distinctive spark, that fierce, unyielding flare of assertiveness that defined her. She remained an indomitable force, refusing to be silenced. And me? I remained trapped in my default setting, a fragile creature whose only response to the merest hint of conflict, the faintest ripple of tension, was an immediate, overwhelming torrent of tears. A testament to my ingrained fear and helplessness. This excruciatingly painful family dynamic, this volatile equilibrium of abuse, fear, and defiant resistance, continued, largely unchanged, for years. It stretched on, a seemingly endless saga, until Millie reached her senior year of high school, a pivotal time for any teenager. I distinctly remember the night before her SATs, a high-stakes exam that held the key to her future. We were all gathered around the dinner table, a deceptively normal scene masking the usual undercurrents of tension. Millie, unlike the rest of us, held her academic aspirations close to her heart, viewing education as her sole pathway to escape, a potential lifeline out of our suffocating reality. She was the only one in our family who genuinely cared about school, investing herself wholeheartedly in her studies. That night, her anxiety was almost palpable. Her hands trembled slightly as she ate, betraying the immense pressure she felt. Her eyes held a distant, almost haunted look, as if she were already somewhere far away, mentally grappling with the impending challenge. The fragile piece of the dinner table was inevitably shattered. In her heightened state of stress, Millie, perhaps seeking a semblance of control, or simply unable to tolerate any more unpleasantness, gently asked Evan to stop chewing with his mouth open. It was a minor request, yet in our volatile environment, it was enough to ignite a firestorm. Evan, perhaps mirroring our father's own aggression, or simply lashing out from his own internalized pain, exploded. "You're going to fail your SATs and be in failure for the rest of your life," he bellowed, his cruel words a vicious, premeditated strike at her deepest fears, designed to tear down her aspirations. His words, delivered with such venom, were a devastating blow. The visible tremors in Millie's hands gave way to outright sobs. Suddenly, she pushed her chair back with a jarring scrape, tears streaming down her face, and without a word, she bolted from the table, fleeing the suffocating atmosphere, and ran upstairs to the sanctuary of her bedroom. Predictably, her departure only served as kindling for our father's ever-present rage. The moment she disappeared, Dad's booming voice filled the void, erupting in a furious torrent of shouts. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his words indistinguishable but his anger unmistakable, his deafening words echoing off the kitchen walls, vibrating through the very structure of our house, ensuring that no one could escape the suffocating presence of his wrath. And where was I during all this? Not rushing to her defense, not offering comfort. Instead, I remained seated at the table, a passive observer, my fingers busy on my phone. I was texting Millie, my messages laced with a cold, unfeeling accusation. "Why would you react like that? You know he didn't mean it. You've done it again, Millie. You've destroyed the peace in our family." I was still so deeply enmeshed in my parents' narrative, still convinced that she, not the abuser, was the true source of all our problems. The aftermath of that night marked a significant turning point. Millie's presence in our home became increasingly scarce, a subtle but profound shift. We hardly saw her anymore. Her days were spent at friends' houses, a refuge from our toxic environment, and her nights, I later learned, were often spent secretly out partying. A desperate attempt to escape the crushing weight of her reality, to find fleeting moments of freedom and rebellion. My own alienation from her only deepened. I never reached out, never sent another text. In my warped perception, reinforced by years of parental conditioning, she was the villain, the disruptive force, the one who had single-handedly destroyed our family, ripping apart its fragile fabric with her inconvenient truths and unwavering defiance. But a strange, unsettling paradox began to unfold. The less I saw of Millie, the more her absence created a vacuum, a gaping hole in our family's twisted dynamic. And into that void, I, the quiet, compliant one, was unwillingly thrust. Slowly, painfully, the horrifying realization dawned on me. I was wrong. Terribly, utterly wrong. Because with Millie gone, I suddenly, terrifyingly, became the new scapegoat. The full, relentless force of my father's abuse, previously often diverted or absorbed by Millie, now descended squarely upon me. Every single day became a terrifying gauntlet of his incessant demands and furious outbursts. He was constantly barking orders, his voice like a harsh drill sergeant. And no matter how diligently I strove to please him, no matter how perfectly I performed, it was never, ever enough. My efforts were met only with criticism, dismissal, and escalating rage. And in a bizarre twist of fate, even my formidable father seemed to tread lightly around Evan. He was, surprisingly, too intimidated by Evan's now hardened demeanor, too wary of his potential explosive reactions, to ever bark orders at him or demand anything of him. The anger that had once been distributed now concentrated its full, venomous power on me. Despite my prior betrayal, despite my unfair accusations, Millie, and her unwavering loyalty, never stopped trying for me. Even in her relative absence, she remained my silent advocate. Every so often, she would reappear, fleetingly, in our home, and with characteristic courage, she would confront our parents, her sharp criticisms cutting through their self-serving narratives, challenging their abuse, and subtly, yet powerfully, reminding me that there was another way, another truth. But even those moments of defiance from Millie were lost on me then. I was still so mired in my own fear and self-preservation that I couldn't truly appreciate her efforts. Not until one ordinary, yet ultimately catastrophic, day when our father, with his ever-watchful, hypercritical gaze, caught Evan in a seemingly innocuous act, placing his damp clothes directly on top of our mother's freshly dried laundry. The trivial transgression instantly ignited Dad's infernal rage. He was already screaming at Evan, his voice a roaring tempest, when abruptly, chillingly, his fury shifted. My name was suddenly bellowed, ripped from his throat, echoing through the house, a summons to the living room that sent a cold shiver of dread down my spine. I knew, with sickening certainty, that I was about to become the new target, the convenient punching bag for his displaced anger. The moment I reluctantly stepped into the living room, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the verbal assault began. My dad, his face contorted with rage, immediately launched into a vicious tirade, his words like poison darts. He called me an ugly girl, a worthless wench, a disgrace who was utterly incapable of keeping my own brother, Evan, in control, somehow blaming me for his actions, twisting the situation into another opportunity to demean and diminish me. I stood there, utterly paralyzed, trying to process the venomous torrent of his words, my mind reeling, attempting to reconcile his cruelty with the faint glimmer of hope that he was still my father. But before I could even fully register the sting of his verbal assault, he moved. With a sudden brutal shove, he pushed me, sending me tumbling violently backwards, sprawling ignominiously over the polished surface of the coffee table, a collision of wood and bone. The impact sent a jolt of pain through me, and instantly, uncontrollably, tears began to stream down my face, hot rivulets of shame and terror. A primal, suffocating fear surged through my veins, cold and metallic, paralyzing me, rooting me to the spot. My breath caught in my throat, a silent, desperate gasp. Even as I struggled, disoriented and trembling, to push myself back onto my feet, to regain some semblance of dignity, he wasn't finished. With a cruel, deliberate movement, he lashed out, kicking the backs of my legs with savage force, sending me crashing down to the floor once more, a crumpled heap of pain and despair. Get the F out of here, he roared, his voice laced with pure contempt, his eyes burning with an almost feral intensity. And in that moment, for the first time, a flicker of clarity cut through the terror. He didn't have to tell me twice. The words echoed in my ears, but his actions had already screamed a message. I was unwanted, despised, and utterly unsafe. Without another thought, fueled by sheer adrenaline and the instinct for self-preservation, I scrambled to my feet. I didn't look back. I bolted, my feet pounding a desperate rhythm against the floor, racing towards the one place that offered even a fleeting promise of sanctuary, the bathroom. I slammed the door shut behind me, the resounding click of the lock a fragile barrier against the monstrous chaos outside. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone, but my mind, strangely clear in its panic, zeroed in on the one person, the only person, who came to mind, Millie. I dialed her number, a desperate plea for help silently forming on my lips. When she answered, her voice a lifeline, I poured out everything, a torrent of raw, unfiltered emotion, recounting the terrifying ordeal, the humiliation, the pain. And she, my brave, troublemaking sister, listened patiently, her voice a balm to my fractured spirit. She spoke to me in that uniquely soft, soothing tone that had always, miraculously, managed to cut through my fear, to anchor me back to reality, reminding me that I wasn't alone. But even that precious moment of connection was brutally interrupted. As I huddled, shivering, on the cold, tiled bathroom floor, my father's enraged shouts pierced through the thin barrier of the door once more. He was screaming my name, his voice a whip, ordering me to get out here and clean the Fing kitchen. The immediate, terrifying reality of my situation slammed back into me. Without a word, without explanation, I abruptly ended the call, leaving Millie on the other end, confused and concerned. My survival instinct took over. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. What felt like an eternity, but was likely only 20 minutes, ticked by. Then a subtle sound, almost imperceptible amidst my trembling breath. The soft, cautious creak of the front door, barely audible, betraying a deliberate attempt at stealth. My heart leapt into my throat. My eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and a burgeoning hope, were fixed on the doorway. And then she appeared. It was Millie, but not alone. She walked in, a figure of strength and unexpected reassurance, accompanied by her boyfriend, a towering, formidable presence, standing an imposing 6 feet 4 inches with a noticeably muscular build. His sheer physical presence radiating an aura of protection. Despite the relief of seeing her, a wave of paralyzing fear still held me captive. I stared at Millie, my gaze pleading, terrified of taking another step outside the bathroom's flimsy sanctuary. What if leaving made things worse? What if my dad, seeing my defiance, punished me even more severely than before? The thought alone was enough to keep me rooted to the spot. Millie, ever perceptive, seemed to intuit my hesitation, my paralyzing terror. Without a moment's delay, she crossed the threshold, her movements swift and purposeful, and gently but firmly, she took my trembling hand in hers. Her eyes, usually so fiery, were now pools of profound comfort and understanding, radiating an unwavering certainty, as if she possessed an innate, deep knowledge of exactly what needed to be done. As if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. In that moment, her quiet strength was contagious, her resolve unbreakable. Before I could even fully grasp the gravity of the decision, before the fear could reassert its grip, she had convinced me. We were leaving, together. And then we were in her car, driving away from that house of horrors, heading towards an apartment I didn't even know she had been secretly renting, a clandestine sanctuary. A tangible symbol of her long-term plan for escape. Once we arrived at the apartment, I mechanically prepared for bed, my body exhausted, but my mind still racing, trying to process the seismic shift in my reality. As I tucked myself under the covers, Millie sat beside me, her voice gentle, asking me to revisit the nightmare. To explain what happened again, to fill in the harrowing details of the moments she had missed after our abrupt phone call. But the trauma was too raw, the memories too painful. I just couldn't. I vehemently shook my head, my every fiber resisting the urge to re-enter that dark space. My mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, yearned only for escape, for a distraction. All I wanted was to focus on the trivial, yet in that moment, profoundly important, Halloween party I had painstakingly planned for the very next day. A childish fantasy of normalcy that seemed a million miles away. My emphatic headshake conveyed my absolute refusal to dwell on the horror. Millie, with a silent understanding that spoke volumes, simply nodded, acknowledging my need for a reprieve, for a moment of peace. And then, with an almost maternal instinct, she picked up her phone, her calm voice ordering McDonald's, a simple act of comfort, a promise of a small, ordinary pleasure amidst the extraordinary chaos of our lives. The simple act of ordering fast food, however, could not erase the stark reality of our situation. That Halloween party, the one I had clung to as a symbol of hope and normalcy, remained an unfulfilled dream. I never got to go. The trauma, the escape, the newfound reality with Millie all conspired to irrevocably alter the course of my life, leaving behind the innocent expectation of a party for the far more complex journey of healing and self-discovery. To my party, a fleeting moment of joy that was brutally shattered the very next day. My mom's text message, stark and chilling, ripped through the fragile peace, demanding my immediate return. Her words, cold and uncompromising, painted Millie as the architect of our collective ruin. Millie had done enough damage to all of us, and in that moment, in my raw vulnerability, I actually believed her. Why wouldn't I? The narrative spun by my parents had been so convincing, so pervasive, but the moment the door swung open and I stepped across the threshold, my dad's hand, a weapon of sudden, crushing force, connected with my cheek. The impact wasn't just a hit, it was a detonation of pain, an explosion that fragmented the world into 1,000 shards before plunging me into an abrupt, terrifying darkness. The last thing I registered was the sickening crack of sound that seemed to reverberate not just against my eardrum, but deep within the very marrow of my skull, echoing the shattering of my nascent hope. Stars, bright and blinding, erupted behind my eyes, then simply vanished into an infinite void. I came to on the cold, unforgiving floor, a dizzying tapestry of pain blooming behind my forehead. Each pulse a hammer blow. The metallic, bitter taste of copper, stark and unmistakable, coated my tongue a grim testament to the violence I just endured, confirming the internal damage. That was the precise, defining moment when the last vestiges of doubt evaporated. I knew, with absolute, terrifying clarity, that I couldn't stay. Not one more torturous night under that roof. I'm sure. I heard myself say, my voice, to my own astonishment, emerging stronger, more resolute than I had any right to expect after such a blow. I want to leave, the words, heavy with unspoken truths and years of suppressed desperation, solidified into an almost tangible presence, shimmering in the charged space between Millie and me. They hung there, utterly irrevocable, etched into the silence like an undeniable truth, impossible to retract. And their taste, a peculiar, exhilarating sensation, like pure, untainted freedom itself, a taste I'd only ever dreamt of, now finally a reality on my tongue. Good, Millie replied, her voice cutting through the lingering tension with a pragmatic edge. Now, I need you to be incredibly smart about this. Meticulously strategic. Her gaze, though calm, held an urgent intensity. The look of a general planning a crucial, high-stakes retreat. Pack only what is absolutely essential for survival and your new beginning. Think lean, think stealth. Clothing, yes, but only the bare necessities enough to survive, not to flaunt. Crucially, if you can secure them, any vital documents that prove your very existence. A birth certificate, an ID. And then, anything deeply sentimental, those irreplaceable fragments of your soul that define who you are, the memories you cannot leave behind. But remember, she emphasized, her gaze piercing, nothing bulky, one single backpack. That's the entirety of your new life, your portable fortress against the past. My heart, a frantic hummingbird trapped within my chest, hammered against my ribs as I absorbed her instructions. This wasn't some abstract fantasy, some whispered wish in the dead of night. This was truly happening. The overwhelming reality of our plan, once a nebulous dream, now sank in, heavy and terrifying, yet paradoxically liberating. Friday, I managed to whisper, my mouth so parched it felt like sandpaper, my tongue thick and unwieldy, clumsy with a volatile cocktail of fear and anticipation. Friday, Millie confirmed, her plan unfolding with surgical precision. Tell them you're going to Sarah's, a friend's house, for a school project sleepover. A perfectly normal, unsuspecting cover story. I'll pick you up 2 blocks from your house, precisely at 7 p.m. Can you do that? Can you maintain this facade? Millie's eyes, dark and fathomless, were intense, focused entirely, singularly on me. She had always possessed that extraordinary ability, that almost supernatural gift, to make you feel like you were the sole, most important person in the entire world when her gaze locked onto yours. Yes, I heard myself affirm, the answer springing forth without even a flicker of hesitation. The raw certainty in my voice surprised even me, echoing the profound conviction that had taken root deep inside. And don't tell anyone, she continued, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper, emphasizing the paramount importance of absolute secrecy. Not your friends, not your teachers, no one. Understand? No one at all. Her stark emphasis on that final, absolute word made me nod slowly, solidly. I understood the stakes, the monumental risks involved. This wasn't a game. This was our life, our freedom. After we disconnected, the silence of my room felt deafening, amplified by the enormity of what lay ahead. I sank onto my bed, staring blankly at the wall, my eyes unconsciously tracing the hairline cracks that spiderwebbed across the faded paint. In the corner, the paint was peeling slightly, revealing ghosts of previous owners' layers of different colors beneath, each representing a forgotten life, a different past. 3 more days in this suffocating house. A mantra began to form in my mind, a desperate prayer. I could do this. I had to. The following day, I awoke with a strange, almost unsettling sense of calm. On the surface, nothing had changed. My dad's booming voice still barked orders from the kitchen, demanding breakfast with his usual gruff authority. My mom, ever the actress in this domestic drama, pretended everything was perfectly fine, a thin veneer over the simmering tension. Evan, my brother, still glared at me from across the table, his eyes filled with a familiar mixture of resentment and disdain. But knowing I had an escape plan, a tangible route to freedom, made it all slightly more bearable, infused with a glimmer of hope that transcended the mundane cruelty. The cereal still tasted the same bland, familiar. The milk was just as cold, but something profound had shifted within me. I was no longer merely trapped. I was merely biding my time, a strategic pause before my inevitable departure. At school, after the final bell shrieked, dismissing the last of my classmates, I approached my English teacher. The classroom was now empty, bathed in the soft, golden afternoon sun that slanted through the blinds, casting long striped shadows across her meticulously organized desk. Mr. Parker, I began, my voice wavering only slightly, a tiny tremor betraying the immense courage it took to speak. I was wondering if I could use you as a reference for a summer job application? She looked up, clearly surprised, but a pleased smile crinkled the corners of her eyes behind her glasses. Of course, dear. When do you need it by? She asked, her tone warm and encouraging. Maybe next week, I replied, a carefully constructed vagueness in my voice. I'll let you know, I desperately needed someone outside my family, a credible, neutral party who could vouch for me if, or more accurately when, things got complicated later. Someone who knew me as a diligent, capable student, not just a disobedient, troublesome daughter. That afternoon, a quiet revolution began. I started gathering my things, not in a frantic rush, but bit by meticulous bit, ensuring no one would notice the subtle erosion of my presence. While my mom was engrossed in a phone conversation, her voice a distant hum from the other room, I slipped my birth certificate from the dusty filing cabinet in the den. The paper, thin and seemingly fragile, felt impossibly important between my fingers, a tangible symbol of my existence, my independent identity. I tucked my school ID and the precious $43 I'd painstakingly saved from birthday money into a sock, a makeshift vault for my meager capital. I sorted through my clothes, mentally selecting what few items would make the cut. What would I truly need for a new life, a future unburdened by this past? And more poignantly, what could I finally, irrevocably leave behind? I even unearthed an old iPod, a relic from a simpler time, and began to secretly record my dad's volatile outbursts whenever I could, each sudden explosion of rage captured and preserved. This would be my proof, irrefutable evidence of what was happening within these walls, in case anyone, any authority, ever questioned my story, my desperate flight. The device was small enough to hide easily in my pocket. Its telltale red recording light obscured with a piece of tape, a tiny, covert eye. Each time I pressed record, my pulse quickened. A frantic rhythm of fear mixed with a steely, unyielding determination. Thursday night, the eve of my escape, sleep was a cruel stranger. Every creak in the old house, every settling groan of the timbers, made me jump, my nerves frayed and raw. The wind, whipping against the window pane, sounded disturbingly like fingers tapping, scratching, as if something, was trying to get in, trying to reach me. What if they somehow knew? A cold dread snaked its way into my heart. What if my dad was merely waiting, a predator biding his time, to catch me in the act of leaving, to snatch away my last sliver of hope? I lay there, rigid and wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling, watching the dancing shadows cast by passing cars outside, their headlights briefly illuminating my room in fleeting, ghostly flashes, only to plunge it back into oppressive darkness. Friday morning dawned, heavy with the weight of expectation and fear. I forced myself, through sheer willpower, to act normal, to maintain the carefully constructed illusion. I ate breakfast, each bite a struggle against my knotted stomach, went to school, navigating the familiar hallways with a newfound detachment, came home, and cleaned the kitchen, performing the mundane rituals like an automaton. The entire routine felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else go through the motions, a character in a play, not my own life. At dinner, the moment of truth arrived. I casually mentioned the fake school project, my voice, miraculously steady. The spaghetti on my plate went largely untouched, my stomach knotted with anxiety to entertain the thought of food. Sarah needs some extra help with her science presentation, I began, keeping my eyes fixed on my plate, pushing a few strands of pasta around with my fork, trying to appear nonchalant. Her mom said I could sleep over so we could finish it. The lie, rehearsed and polished, came out smoother, more convincing than I had ever dared to expect. My mom, however, was not easily fooled. Her eyes narrowed, scrutinizing me with a suspicious intensity that made my heart pound. Which Sarah as this, her tone was laced with doubt. Her fork, halfway to her mouth, paused in midair. I had prepared for this, had anticipated this very question. Sarah Jen, from my biology class, I recited, the details flowing easily. You met her mom at the school open house last year. This was all meticulously true. Sarah was a real person, though we weren't close, and our moms had indeed exchanged pleasantries once. The carefully woven thread of truth within the lie made it remarkably more believable, infinitely harder to question. I don't remember approving this, my dad interjected, his voice a low rumble of skepticism. His fork, like my mom's, also paused halfway to his mouth, a piece of chicken dangling precariously from its tines. His eyes, hard and piercing, searched my face, dissecting my every micro-expression for any telltale signs of deception. Mom did, I lied, turning to her with an imploring, almost accusatory gaze. Remember when I asked on Tuesday? I held my breath, every fiber of my being taut with anticipation, waiting for her response. Waiting for her to either corroborate my carefully constructed lie or shatter it into a million pieces, the second. The tense silence stretched out agonizingly between us, each second feeling like an eternity under the weight of my unspoken plea. My mom hesitated, a fleeting shadow of uncertainty crossing her features. I watched, captivated by the subtle micro-expressions that betrayed her inner turmoil, and she tried to decide, should she admit, with a sheepish glance, that the details of my request had completely slipped her mind? Or would it be simpler, less confrontational, to merely nod along, pretending a perfect recall she clearly lacked? The delicate, internal calculation, a silent weighing of potential conflict versus perceived ease, played out visibly across her face, a fleeting pantomime of parental dilemma. Oh, right, she finally murmured, a forced lightness in her tone, as if recalling a minor detail. But be back by noon tomorrow, you hear. You have chores to do. With that, her gaze, previously fixed on me, brought back to her half-eaten meal, signaling a return to the mundane. The matter officially, though perhaps superficially, settled. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, a slow, imperceptible exhale, careful not to betray the surge of pure, unadulterated relief that threatened to bubble over. The clock hands crept towards 6:30, each tick amplifying the frantic beat of my heart. I swung my backpack onto my shoulders, a worn, unassuming canvas bag, attempting to project an air of nonchalant ease that was entirely performative. Inside, meticulously packed, was the paltry sum of my existence, every cherished item and essential belonging reduced to a single, portable universe. It felt as if the entire physical weight of my life, every memory and dream, had been condensed into this solitary bag. My old iPod, a relic yet a crucial accomplice, was tucked deep and safe within my coat pocket, its familiar heft a constant reminder, a tangible repository of the recorded evidence hushed whispers. Sharp words, chilling silences of the very world I was desperately fleeing. Don't you dare stay up all night giggling with your friend. Now, my mom called out, her voice a carefully constructed facade of casual concern, almost normal, almost genuinely maternal. As I moved towards the door, for a fleeting, terrifying second, a pang of doubt, a dizzying sense of disorientation made me almost waver, almost turn back. I won't, I managed, the lie tasting like ass. My dad, however, offered no such platitudes. He remained fixed on the flickering blue light of the television screen, utterly absorbed, the artificial glow casting unsettling, alien shadows across his impassive face. Thankfully, Evan was out somewhere, his absence a profound relief. It spared me one last, agonizing goodbye I simply couldn't bear to make, a final thread to sever. I forced myself to walk with an almost unnatural normalcy, each measured step a carefully constructed act of deception, until the moment I rounded the familiar street corner, out of sight. Then, as if an invisible dam had burst, I broke into an uncontrolled, desperate run. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat so thunderous I could feel its frantic vibrations echoing in my throat, a primal instinct taking over. The cool evening air, a sharp contrast to the internal inferno of my anxiety, rushed against my face, carrying with it the comforting, yet now alien, sense of someone's dinner cooking, perhaps a savory roast or simmering pasta mingled with the clean, fresh aroma of recently cut grass, a stark reminder of the ordinary life I was abandoning. A cascade of panicked what-if scenarios flooded my mind. What if Millie didn't show up? What if this whole elaborate escape was nothing more than a cruel, elaborate test, designed to expose my disloyalty? But then, precisely as the minute hand of my internal clock touched 7, a dark sedan, sleek and purposeful, glided to a silent halt beside me. Millie, her face a mask of concentrated resolve, leaned across the console and pushed open the passenger door, a silent invitation. "Get in," she commanded, her voice low and tight with unspoken urgency. I practically hurled my backpack into the backseat before scrambling in after it, my movements clumsy with adrenaline. The car enveloped me in a comforting, familiar embrace of scent. The rich, invigorating aroma of freshly brewed coffee, unmistakably hers, blended subtly with the floral notes of Millie's signature perfume. Before I could even fully close the door, the latch barely catching, Millie was already pulling away from the curb. The tires let out a faint, almost imperceptible squeal as we accelerated, a fleeting whisper of sound, the sole, understated testament to the profound urgency that gripped her. "Did anyone follow you?" she asked, her voice a low murmur barely audible above the hum of the engine. Her eyes, darting and intense, constantly flicked between the rearview mirror and the dark ribbon of asphalt ahead. I saw the stark white of her knuckles gripping the steering wheel, a silent testament to the tension that held her rigid. Her profile, etched sharply in the dim dashboard light, was tight with a focused resolve. "No, I don't think so," I replied, though my gaze was already fixed on the back window, half expecting, with a jolt of visceral fear, to see the ominous headlights of my dad's car bearing down on us. A relentless hunter closing in. She gave a curt nod, her eyes still scanning, a silent sentinel. "We're not going back to my old apartment," she stated, her tone firm, declarative. "I found a new place. It's smaller, yes, but it's in a truly secure building, the kind with keycard access and an intercom system. No one gets in without being buzzed up by a resident." Her voice remained steady, remarkably practical, betraying no hint of the frantic desperation that had fueled our departure. It struck me then, with a profound, almost crushing weight, how meticulously she had thought of everything. My mind, consumed by the immediate need to simply endure, hadn't even processed the necessity of a truly secret haven. Of course, we couldn't possibly return to the apartment my parents knew about that was glaringly obvious now, yet completely overlooked in my panicked survival mode. The full, sobering realization of the sheer depth of her planning, the meticulous foresight she had invested in my escape, hit me with the force of a physical blow. While I had merely been surviving day to day, a prisoner counting the hours, she had been methodically, quietly, constructing an intricate, vital escape route, a lifeline thrown across an abyss. A sudden, belated thought pierced through my fog of adrenaline. "What about your boyfriend, Jason?" I blurted out, realizing, with a fresh wave of guilt, the potential sacrifices she'd made. Right, I remembered him vividly, his imposing presence filling our cramped kitchen, a man who seemed to dwarf everything, even making my usually domineering dad appear surprisingly small and insignificant beside him. "We broke up," she stated flatly, her voice clipped, devoid of emotion, though the unspoken pain hung heavy in the air. He thought I was obsessing too much about our family and said I needed to move on. As she spoke his condescending words, she made exaggerated air quotes with one hand, her grip on the steering wheel never faltering with the other, her knuckles still stark white against the dark leather. The bitterness in her tone was not just evident. It was palpable, a thick, acrid cloud, a rare and startling crack in her typically impenetrable composure. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, the quiet punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the faint rush of wind. The farther we journeyed from the suffocating confines of my old home, the lighter I felt, as if shedding not just a physical burden, but an invisible, suffocating heavy coat I had been forced to wear for years. Street by silent street, mall by liberating mall, the oppressive weight lifted, dissipating into the cool night air. I watched, mesmerized, as unfamiliar neighborhoods scrolled past the window, each house a beacon with its warm, glowing windows, sparking a profound curiosity within me. What kind of quiet, unknown stories unfolded behind those illuminated panes? What kind of lives did people lead in these tranquil, anonymous spaces, so utterly different from my own? "They're going to be so incredibly angry," I finally murmured, the words feeling foreign and small in the quiet expanse of the car. As I watched the last vestiges of our familiar street shrink and then utterly vanish in the rearview mirror, receding into the darkness like a fading bad dream. The chilling thought, a cold serpent coiling in my gut, sent an involuntary shiver tracing its way down my spine, despite the car's heater diligently blowing a steady stream of warm, comforting air directly onto my face. Millie, her gaze briefly leaving the road, glanced at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Are you having second thoughts? She asked, her voice a soft, careful query, utterly neutral, neither pushing nor judging, merely offering a space for honesty. Remember, I started, my voice catching, I know what's coming. The explosion, the furious accusations, the relentless blame, the suffocating guilt trips. I could almost physically hear my mom's shrill, wounded tone. Almost see the vein throbbing in my dad's temple, his face contorted with unbridled rage, a horrifying tableau playing out in my mind's eye. Millie nodded grimly, a silent affirmation. Yeah, she replied, her voice barely a whisper, me too. A profound, unspoken understanding passed between us then, a silent current of shared trauma and anticipation, requiring no further words. No elaborate explanations, we both knew, with a terrifying, intimate certainty, precisely the depths of emotional manipulation and destructive fury our parents were capable of unleashing. The new apartment, our sanctuary, was nestled on the third floor of a rather unassuming building, which nonetheless boasted a formidable security door at its entrance. A reassuring barrier against the outside world. It was undeniably tiny, comprising just a single bedroom, a compact bathroom, and a cleverly combined kitchen-living area. Yet it exuded an immediate sense of cleanliness and an almost ethereal brightness. The walls, painted a soft, soothing cream color, were sparsely adorned, save for one small, framed print depicting a serene beach scene, a subtle window to a world of calm. The furniture, though minimal, was thoughtfully chosen for its functionality, a comfortable, albeit modest, couch, a simple coffee table, and a small dining set. There was nothing ostentatious or fancy about it, but crucially, nothing was broken, stained, or bearing the marks of neglect, a stark contrast to what I was used to. You can have the bedroom, Millie declared, her voice resonating with an unshakable resolve, as she gently dropped my backpack onto the neatly made bed. I'll take the couch out here. The bed itself, with its pristine blue comforter that looked freshly laundered and new, beckoned invitingly. No, I can't take your. I started to protest, my voice a whisper of ingrained self-sacrifice, but she cut me off with a dismissive wave of her hand, her expression unwavering. It's fine. I work late shifts anyway. We'll barely overlap. You'll see, her tone, firm and utterly devoid of negotiation, made it abundantly clear that the matter was not up for discussion. Her generosity was absolute. I slowly surveyed the sparse room, just the bed, a small dresser, and little else to fill the space. Yet, in that moment, it felt infinitely safer, more profoundly secure, than any room I had occupied in years, perhaps my entire life. There would be no furious shouting erupting from the other side of the wall, no stealthy, approaching footsteps to strain my ears for, no agonizing need to hold my breath, muscles tensed. Whenever a door swung open unexpectedly. Thank you, I whispered, the words barely audible, feeling utterly, hopelessly inadequate for the monumental, life-altering rescue she had just orchestrated. How could such small sounds possibly convey the boundless gratitude swelling in my chest? Millie's usually resolute face softened then, shedding its mask of practicality. You're my sister, she said simply, her voice thick with an emotion she usually kept hidden. I wasn't going to leave you there. She squeezed my shoulder once, a warm, reassuring pressure, then turned abruptly away, but not before I caught the telltale shimmer of ancient tears glistening in her eyes, a fleeting glimpse into the depth of her own pain and sacrifice. That night, cradled in the unfamiliar stillness of the new bedroom, I slept better than I had in months, perhaps even in years. There was no longer any need to strain my ears listening for heavy footsteps approaching in the hall. No need to brace myself, muscles tensed, for the inevitable, shattering explosion of anger. Just a profound, unbroken quiet. The mattress, though new, felt blessedly firmer than my old, saggy one at home, the pillow softer, more inviting, cradling my head in an unexpected comfort. Outside, the occasional car hummed past, but the sound was distant, muted, utterly unthreatening, merely a gentle lullaby from a world that now felt safe, allowing me to finally drift off into a deep, dreamless sleep, soothed by the quiet hum of the building's ancient, comforting presence. The hum, a gentle thrum emanating from the refrigerator, was a steady counterpoint to the soft, rhythmic click-clack of Millie typing on her laptop, a quiet symphony that filled the living room. This fragile peace, this moment of unburdened stillness, lasted with an almost cruel precision until precisely 10:07 the next morning. That's when my phone, resting innocently on the nightstand, didn't just buzz. It exploded, vibrating violently, a relentless assault of incoming texts from my mom. The sudden, frantic buzzing ripped me from a deep, dreamless sleep, jolting me awake with an instantaneous surge of adrenaline. My heart, before I had even registered a single word on the screen, was already racing, pounding a panicked rhythm against my ribs, a visceral premonition of the storm that had just broken. Where are you? One message shrieked, its digital characters screaming urgency. Sarah's mom says you never showed up. Answer me right now. Your father is furious. The accusatory tone, the implied threat of my father's wrath, sent a cold shiver down my already agitated spine. My hands, trembling uncontrollably, fumbled with the phone as I showed the relentless barrage of messages to Millie. Even as she glanced at the screen, another incoming text made the display flare with an almost hostile light, then another, and another. They cascaded in so quickly, a relentless digital assault, that the phone barely ceased its frantic vibration, a tangible manifestation of my mother's escalating panic and fury. Turn off your phone, she said, her voice surprisingly calm, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on my screen. There was a quiet certainty in her tone, an unspoken understanding that resonated deep within me. We knew this was coming. Her composure, so utterly unruffled amidst my rising panic, was an anchor. It grounded me, forcing me to confront the stark reality. We had, in fact, anticipated this exact moment, strategized for it. For a heartbeat, I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the off button, a moment suspended between fear and resolve. Then, a sudden, fierce clarity washed over me. I typed one brief, unequivocal message: I'm safe. I'm not coming back. With a deliberate, almost ceremonial press, I powered off my phone, severing the digital tether to my old life, and placed it on the cool kitchen counter. The silence that instantly descended upon the room was profound, a sudden, echoing void that felt simultaneously terrifying in its unknown implications and incredibly liberating in its absolute finality. What now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the question hanging heavy in the sun-drenched air. Sunlight, a deceptive symbol of normalcy, streamed through the kitchen window, painting a warm, golden rectangle onto the linoleum floor. It was profoundly strange, almost absurd, how utterly normal everything appeared, how indifferent the world seemed, when my entire life had just been irrevocably torn apart and rebuilt in a single, terrifying moment. Now we wait, Millie responded, her gaze steady, pragmatic. There was no trace of doubt in her voice, only a quiet, steely determination. They'll escalate before they back down. This is how they operate. Her prediction proved unnervingly accurate, a testament to her deep understanding of the psychological warfare my parents waged. By that evening, Millie's phone, now our sole point of contact with the outside world, had captured 6 voicemails, each one a fresh wave in the escalating storm. The initial few were from my mom, her voice a jarring pendulum swinging between vitriolic threats and tearful, desperate pleas. One moment, it was laced with a chilling anger. The next, it was broken, dissolving into a ragged, heart-wrenching sob, only to snap back to fury. It was a familiar, emotionally exhausting cycle, one I had endured, in various forms, my entire life. The last voicemail, however, was from my dad. His voice, usually gruff but controlled, was now a low, guttural growl that reverberated with suppressed rage. If you don't bring her home right now, he snarled, each word a venomous arrow, you'll regret it. Both of you will. Despite the apartment's comforting warmth, his voice sent a primal, icy chill, a deeply ingrained, almost instinctive terror, skittering down my spine. Some conditioned responses, I realized, were incredibly hard to shake, even after years of trying. Without a moment's hesitation, Millie, her expression resolute, deleted them all without deigning to respond. Her finger pressed the delete button with a quiet and wavering finality that felt less like erasing a message and more like decisively closing a heavy, unyielding door on a chapter of our lives, slamming it shut. The next day, a quiet Sunday, brought another jolt. My phone pinged. I had turned it back on, just briefly, driven by a morbid curiosity and a residual habit to check for messages. The singular notification, an unexpected intrusion, made my stomach drop with an almost nauseating lurch. But I forced myself, through sheer willpower, to tap it open and read the cryptic words. Don't expect anything from us when he dies. That was it. No context, no explanation, no clarification of who he was, or what it meant. The stark brevity, the chilling ambiguity, felt not just unhelpful, but deliberately cruel. A calculated psychological blow designed to force me to imagine, to conjure. The absolute worst possible scenario. I showed it to Millie, my hand still trembling slightly. He's trying to guilt you, she stated, her voice steady and unwavering, her gaze sharp. Dad probably put him up to it. You know how he's always making vague threats about his health when he wants attention. A twisted form of emotional blackmail. Remember when he dramatically declared his heart was giving out, just because Evan wanted to go to summer camp? Her voice, though outwardly steady and rational, carried a subtle tremor, a faint note of concern that was betrayed by a small, almost imperceptible gesture. She bit her lip. It was a fleeting action, a flicker of uncertainty that belied her reassuring words, a tiny crack in her composure that revealed her own underlying worrying, despite her outward calm. The insidious possibility that something might actually be wrong, that this time wasn't just another manipulated ploy, began to gnaw at me, a persistent, uncomfortable itch in the back of my mind. But I fiercely pushed it away, suppressing the rising tide of fear. We had, after all, been subjected to far too many false alarms, too many theatrical pronouncements of impending doom, to trust this particular one. Monday morning arrived with a sense of purpose. Millie, ever the pragmatist, helped me enroll at a new school. We fabricated a story, using her address and declaring her my guardian, a technical untruth that, fortunately, the administration seemed content to overlook, asking blessedly few questions. The school itself was a sprawling, unfamiliar landscape, much larger than my old one, its hallways noticeably wider and brighter, a striking visual contrast to the cramped, familiar corridors I had left behind. As we navigated the bustling office, no one spared me a second glance. I was, blessedly, just another new student, unremarkable, utterly unknown, and gloriously anonymous, a profound relief after years of living under a microscope. What if they come looking for me? I asked Millie as we walked back to the apartment, the question, a persistent, unwelcome echo, having weighed heavily on my mind ever since our departure. The sidewalk beneath our feet was a patchwork of cracked concrete, and through those fissures, tenacious small weeds defiantly pushed their way upwards, a vivid, almost symbolic reminder of persistent life finding a way through, against all odds. They might, she admitted, her tone measured, her honesty unflinching. But if they do, they'd have to publicly admit why you left in the first place, expose the true nature of their control. And I don't think they want that kind of negative attention. That kind of scrutiny on their carefully constructed image. Her logic was undeniably sound, a cold, hard truth, yet it failed to completely extinguish the smoldering embers of my fear. I still found myself compulsively glancing over my shoulder, my eyes darting nervously, scanning the faces in the passing crowds for the unmistakable sight of my dad's furious, incandescent glare, or my mom's chillingly disapproving frown, vestiges of a control I was desperate to escape. That night, the attack came from a new, insidious direction. My phone, once again a conduit for my parents' relentless manipulation, lit up with an overwhelming torrent of messages. These weren't from my immediate family, but from a vast, interconnected network of relatives and family friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, some I barely remembered. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even former neighbors all were suddenly, uniformly, and profoundly concerned about my whereabouts. Each message a carefully crafted dagger. Your poor mother is worried sick. One read, dripping with faint sympathy. How could you do this to your family? Another accused, twisting the knife of guilt. Your father says you've been hanging out with a bad crowd. An ominous warning, meant to cast doubt on my character and Millie's influence. The meticulously crafted narrative they were disseminating, a cleverly twisted version of events, portrayed me as a wayward runaway, living with a boyfriend, implying that Millie had actively encouraged my rebellion, suggesting that I was deliberately, cruelly breaking my parents' hearts. Each message, each carefully chosen word, felt like a deliberate act of rewriting history, twisting the truth to paint me as the ungrateful villain in their perfect family drama. The familiar, suffocating blanket of guilt, a deeply ingrained emotional response, began to creep back in, its insidious tentacles tightening around my resolve. The programming, the years of emotional conditioning, was so profoundly deep, so intricately woven into my very being, that it was excruciatingly hard to resist. They're trying to control the narrative, Millie explained, her voice hardening with quiet fury as I showed her the onslaught of messages. They know that if people hear what really happened, if the truth of their abuse comes out, they'll lose their perfect family image. Their meticulously cultivated facade will crumble. She scrolled through the messages, her expression growing progressively sterner, more resolved, with each new accusation. The soft glow of the lamp cast dark shadows across her face, accentuating the lines of stress, making her look older, wearier, burdened by the weight of our shared struggle. I scrolled through the messages, a wave of nausea washing over me, my stomach churning with a sickening dread. The words blurred together, a relentless, accusatory chorus of guilt trips and condemnations. No one's going to believe us, are they? I whispered, the thought a devastating, crushing weight. The idea that after everything we had endured, all the courage it had taken to escape, we might still be the ones painted as wrong, as liars, was utterly soul-crushing. Millie remained quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant, her mind clearly racing, piecing together a strategy. Then, a spark of resolve ignited in her gaze. Show me those recordings again, she commanded, her voice now imbued with a determined, almost fierce edge, a clarity that made me realize she was actively formulating a plan. Mapping out our next move, get it? I pulled out the old iPod, a small, unassuming device, now transformed into a potent weapon of truth, and played a few of the clearest recordings. My dad's voice, amplified and distorted through the tiny speaker, was unmistakable, a torrent of raw, unbridled rage screaming about what a profound disappointment I was. Then, the sickening thud of something, an impact, followed by the chillingly detached voice of my mom, cold as ice, telling me to clean up your own blood. The audio, though tinny and compressed through the small speaker, carried an undeniable weight, a raw, visceral truth. The seething rage in his voice was unmistakable, undeniable, a palpable force that could still make me flinch. And the fear, my own fear, captured in my strained breathing, in my hushed pleas, was just as undeniable, a testament to the terror I had lived with. People will believe this, Millie declared, her voice firm, resolute, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. We understood we had to be incredibly strategic about who received our message, each recipient a potential ally or unwitting informant. Our carefully considered outreach began with Aunt Dorothy, my mother's sister. She had always struck us as a gentle anomaly within the family's often stifling dynamics, a little kinder, a touch more empathetic than the rest. Though she resided 3 states away and our interactions were largely confined to the forced cheer of major holidays, she had a consistent way of bringing not just presents, but thoughtful gifts, things that showed she actually listened to our fleeting conversations. More importantly, she'd ask genuine, searching questions about our lives, her gaze unwavering, truly interested in the answers. To her, we dispatched a brief, almost clinical email. It stated simply, unequivocally, that I had left home due to abuse. Attached was a single audio clip, stark and unedited. The message was intentionally lean, purely factual, stripped bare of any overt emotional pleas. We let the truth speak for itself. Her response arrived with the morning light, a notification ping that held the weight of a verdict. I always suspected, she wrote, the words of profound validation. Your mom has been making excuses for your dad's temper for years. What do you need? It wasn't an outpouring of sentiment, no dramatic declarations, but in its quiet, direct strength, it was everything. It was a decisive crack in the suffocating wall of silence we'd been trapped behind for so long, a tiny, yet potent, beam of light finally breaking through the oppressive darkness. We could almost feel the air growing lighter around us. Next on our list was Margaret, a good friend of my mom's, who had two daughters my exact age and had always treated me with a warmth that felt rare and precious. I remembered vividly a time she'd once discreetly slipped me a crumpled $20 bill when my dad, in one of his arbitrary moods, refused to give me money for a school field trip. "This can be our little secret," she'd whispered conspiratorially, her eyes kind. A moment of unexpected grace in a childhood often devoid of it. Then came my dad's cousin, Bruce. He was a man who, during a boisterous family barbecue one summer, had witnessed my dad's explosive temper unleashed on Evan in front of everyone. I recall the scene with chilling clarity. Bruce had calmly, yet forcefully, pulled my dad aside, his voice dropping to low, intense tones, his hand gripping my dad's arm with an almost warning tightness. The result? An eerie, uncharacteristic quietness from my dad for the remainder of that day, a testament to Bruce's subtle power. The reactions to our carefully curated messages were varied, a stark cross-section of human nature. Some people, predictably, never responded at all, their silence a deafening echo of our deepest fears. Others sent back shocked messages, a mix of disbelief and dawning comprehension. A precious view, like Aunt Dorothy, extended tangible help, offers of money, a safe place to stay should we need it, or connections to valuable resources. Each supportive response, no matter how small, felt like a small, hard-won victory. It was a profound validation, a reassuring whisper in our collective consciousness that we weren't crazy, that the terrifying reality we had endured was not, in fact, normal or acceptable. "See," Millie affirmed, her voice a soothing balm against the lingering anxiety. "Not everyone is like them." She showed me a message from our mother's college roommate, a woman who wrote that she had, years ago, deliberately cut contact with our mom. Her reason, a pattern of concerning behaviors and emotional manipulation she had consistently noticed, too insidious to ignore. The revelation that others had, for years, seen through the meticulous facade my parents presented to the world was strangely, profoundly comforting. We weren't alone in our perceptions. Yet, this fragile comfort was fleeting. The backlash was swift and brutally effective. My parents, masters of deflection and denial, immediately doubled down on their fabricated narrative. They meticulously spun tales to anyone who would lend an ear, asserting that I was a troubled child, a fantasist fabricating stories for attention, and that Millie had always been a malevolent influence, pulling me astray. The campaign was a coordinated, relentless assault on our credibility. They shamelessly called in old favors, leveraged long-standing relationships, and artfully wove elaborate sagas of their perfectly idyllic family being cruelly torn apart by ungrateful, rebellious daughters. One late evening, as we were tidying up the quiet apartment after dinner, the phone rang, a jarring intrusion. It was my dad's brother, calling Millie directly. She answered on speaker, her voice carefully neutral, a practiced mask, until the moment she recognized the caller. "You need to stop this right now," he declared, his voice a cold, hard blade cutting through the air. "You're tearing this family apart with your lies." The chilling similarity to my dad's cadence, that same insidious underlying threat, sent a sickening shiver down my spine, making my skin crawl. "They're not lies," Millie shot back, her voice unwavering, unyielding. And the family was already broken. She stood tall, her shoulders back, her posture radiating defiance as if he could somehow see her through the phone line. He hung up abruptly, the sharp click followed by the loud, buzzing dial tone that echoed almost violently in the sudden silence of the apartment. Millie carefully set the phone down, her movements controlled, precise. But despite her outward composure, I couldn't help but notice the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. Standing up to them, even remotely, still took an immense toll. Even now, a full 2 weeks after my tumultuous departure from home, I hadn't been able to return to my old school. The new school was, in its own way, okay. No one knew me, which meant no one asked the difficult, probing questions I couldn't bear to answer. But in truth, I felt like I was sleepwalking through the days, a ghost moving through unfamiliar corridors. The classrooms blurred into a monotonous sameness, the teachers' names elusive, difficult to grasp and remember. I drifted from class to class, my mind distant, taking notes mechanically, speaking only when directly called upon, my responses clipped and minimal. At night, the tranquility of sleep remained elusive, replaced by vivid, recurring nightmares. My dad, a relentless hunter, always finding me, always dragging me back home to the suffocating confines of our old life. In these terrifying dreamscapes, my legs were heavy, unable to run fast enough, my throat constricted, unable to scream loud enough. I'd wake up with a gasp, my heart hammering against my ribs, the sheets twisted tightly around my legs, binding me like cruel restraints. Sometimes, Millie would simply be there, a glass of cool water in her hand, as if she had sensed my distress, my silent struggles, from the quiet sanctuary of the other room. "Maybe we should talk to someone official," I suggested one evening, the words hesitant on my tongue. "Like, report them or something." We were curled on the couch, the TV a low murmur in the background, some generic sitcom with an incongruous laugh track that felt jarring, almost offensively cheerful, against the raw, serious nature of our conversation. Millie looked up from her laptop, her brow furrowed with a weary understanding. "We could," she conceded, "but without physical evidence of recent abuse, it might not go anywhere. And if it didn't, she didn't even need to articulate the rest of the sentence. The unspoken terror hung heavy in the air between us. If we reported them and nothing came of it, their wrath would be boundless. They would be even angrier, even more relentlessly determined to drag me back. The very system designed to protect individuals like us, the vulnerable, the voiceless, so often failed, leaving its supposed beneficiaries more exposed, more vulnerable than before. What about the recordings? I pressed, my gaze falling upon the iPod nestled innocently on the coffee table between us. It looked so harmless, so utterly ordinary, despite its damning, explosive contents. They help, she sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of experience and systemic frustrations. But the system doesn't always work the way it should, especially when the parents are adept at presenting themselves as perfectly normal, upstanding citizens. Her fingers tapped a restless, agitated rhythm on the keyboard, a subtle betrayer of her inner turmoil and deep-seated frustration. I nodded slowly, a wave of sickening recognition washing over me. I remembered, all too well, how effortlessly charming my dad could be when it suited his purpose. How my mom could instantaneously switch on the performance of a deeply concerned, loving parent. How they had expertly fooled teachers, unsuspecting neighbors, and even close friends for what felt like an eternity. The mere thought of facing them in a courtroom, of being forced to confront their toxic presence again, made my stomach churn with a visceral wave of nausea. So, what do we do? The question hung suspended in the air between us, heavy with unspoken implications, echoing the overwhelming helplessness we both felt. Millie closed her laptop with a decisive click, her gaze meeting mine, resolute. We keep building our case, she stated, her voice imbued with a quiet, unwavering strength. And we make absolutely sure as many people as possible know the truth. Her determination, a steadfast, immutable constant in my terrifyingly shifting world, was the only thing holding me steady. That night, sleep remained an elusive phantom. I lay awake, my mind racing, consumed by the poignant image of all the other children, just like me, trapped in homes where their cries for help went unheard, where no one believed their harrowing truths. Children who had no Millie to offer them a lifeline, no beacon to guide their escape from the darkness. How many of them went to school each day with silent bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, flinching instinctively at every loud noise, never daring to invite friends over to witness the broken reality of their lives? How many were lying awake right at this very moment, meticulously planning their desperate escape or, far worse, internalizing the abuse, tragically believing they deserved what was happening to them? The thought was a chilling, unshakable whisper in the suffocating quiet of the night. The repercussions of my actions were already reverberating through their lives. I pushed myself off the couch and walked into the living room where Millie was still awake, her silhouette hunched over her phone. The only illumination in the dark apartment was the cool, almost ethereal blue glow emanating from her screen, painting her face in stark contrast and deepening the weary shadows beneath her eyes. She must have sensed my presence, her head snapped up, instantly alert, the soft light momentarily blinding her. I want to tell our story, I announced, the words surprisingly resolute. All of it, publicly, the conviction in my voice startled even me. It felt like a dam breaking within my own consciousness. Millie's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then apprehension, crossing her features. Are you sure? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with a very real concern. Once it's out there, truly out there for the world to see, you can't ever take it back, you know. Her caution was more than valid. It was a stark reminder of the immense weight of such a decision. Going public wouldn't just mean airing our dirty laundry. It would mean tearing down every protective barrier, exposing the raw, vulnerable truth of our lives to the merciless scrutiny and judgment of countless strangers, and worse, our own family. I'm sure, I affirmed, and in that moment, I truly was. After what felt like an eternity of uncertainty, of wavering doubts and unspoken fears, a profound sense of clarity had settled over me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt absolutely, unshakably certain about something. The very next day, I began to write. I sat down at the kitchen table, a blank document open on my laptop, and let the words flow. It was an unfiltered torrent, a complete chronicle of our existence, from my earliest, fragmented memories of my dad's explosive, unpredictable rage to that final, brutal blow that had rendered me unconscious. I painstakingly detailed my mom's chilling enablement, her silent complicity that often felt more cruel than outright abuse. I recounted Evan's unsettling transformation, how he'd shifted from a fellow victim to an almost willing participant in our family's twisted dynamics. And I meticulously described Millie's quiet, persistent attempts to help, her small acts of rebellion and support that had been lifelines in the suffocating darkness. The words didn't just come, they poured out of me, an unstoppable deluge of pent-up emotion, years of enforced silence finally shattering into 1,000 pieces. It was a catharsis unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I intentionally avoided using our real names, a small shield against immediate identification, yet I wove in enough specific, intimate details that anyone who truly knew us, anyone who had been even remotely aware of the tremors beneath our family's polished surface, would undoubtedly recognize the story as our own. When I finally typed the last sentence, feeling both drained and strangely liberated, I read the entire narrative aloud to Millie. By the time I finished, her eyes were glistening with enched tears, her gaze fixed on the screen. It's perfect, she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Then her hand reached across the table, finding mine and resting there, warm and steady. But are you absolutely certain you want to post this? Are you ready for everything that comes with it? I met her gaze and nodded, a silent vow passing between us. I want other kids like us who are trapped in similar nightmares, to know they're not alone, I explained, the words feeling weighty, meaningful. And perhaps more importantly, I want our parents to know, unequivocally, that they can't silence me anymore. Not ever again. The decision felt profoundly right, like finally stepping out of a suffocating, pitch-black room and into the glorious, healing warmth of direct sunlight after years of living in shadows. With a renewed sense of purpose, I created a new, anonymous social media account. I uploaded my meticulously crafted story, pairing it with a few of the clearest, most incriminating audio clips I had managed to secretly record over the years. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, I typed out a message and prepared to send the link. My finger hovered over the send button for what felt like an eternity, a single moment pregnant with the weight of irreversible consequence, before I pressed it down firmly, decisively. No going back now, I thought, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. The response was, as anticipated, immediate and utterly overwhelming. My phone, usually a silent companion, erupted with a constant barrage of notifications. Messages poured in, an incredible deluge of reactions. Some were fiercely supportive, expressions of solidarity and empathy. Others were accusatory, laced with venom and disbelief, clearly from those unwilling to see past the facade. And then there were the messages from complete strangers, hundreds of them, sharing their own harrowing experiences, their stories echoing mine with chilling familiarity. Within the first 24 hours, my post had been shared hundreds of times. People I'd never met from all corners of the country were commenting, offering resources, words of encouragement, and, most powerfully, their own narratives of survival. It was as if a long-dormant dam had finally burst, releasing an unstoppable flood of shared pain, collective understanding, and unwavering resilience. And then, just as predicted, came the fallout. The meticulously constructed world my parents had built, that glossy, picture-perfect image they had so carefully cultivated, began to crumble, brick by agonizing brick. My mom's most devout church friend, a woman who had been a fixture in our lives for decades, abruptly stopped her weekly visits. My dad, who had recently picked up a part-time contract job to supplement his income, lost it almost immediately when his new boss, a man with a keen ear, recognized his voice from one of the audio clips I'd posted. And Evan, according to a hushed phone call from our gossipy Aunt Dorothy, had dropped out of school, reportedly disappearing for days at a time, succumbing to a familiar pattern of escapism. Their carefully orchestrated facade, once so impenetrable, was now disintegrating, exposing the ugly, festering rock of truth that lay beneath. "You've ruined everything," my mom's text message blazed across my screen late one night. "I hope you're happy." It arrived well after midnight, probably after a few too many glasses of wine, I surmised. I could almost hear the bitter, self-pitying tremor in her voice through the stark, unforgiving text. I didn't respond. I simply couldn't. In that moment, for the very first time, a profound, undeniable truth settled within me. Their happiness, their carefully constructed semblance of a perfect life, had always been contingent upon my silence, my unwavering compliance, my willingness to silently absorb their abuse without a single complaint. Their idyllic family portrait was built not on love or respect, but on the broken pieces of my spirit, and I absolutely, unequivocally refused to be the one to painstakingly rebuild it for them. About a month after my story had gone truly viral, Millie and I were having a quiet dinner in our apartment when a sudden, violent pounding erupted from the door. The sound was so utterly unexpected, so aggressively loud, that I dropped my fork with a clatter, the metallic echo piercing the sudden, stunned silence. We both froze, eyes wide with alarm, staring at each other across the small table. The pounding came again, even harder this time, rattling the door so violently in its frame that I half expected the wood to splinter. "Who is it?" Millie called out, her voice remarkably steady, though she didn't move from her chair. Despite her outward calm, I could see the rigid tension in her shoulders, the slow, deliberate way her hand instinctively reached for her phone. "Open this door right now," my dad's voice, slurred but utterly unmistakable, roared from the other side. My blood instantly turned to ice. The room seemed to tilt around me, the walls closing in, pressing in on all sides. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. "How did he find us?" I managed to whisper, my voice a mere rasp, barely audible over the relentless, thundering blows against the door. My hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles gleamed white, stark against my skin. Millie, already holding her phone, looked at me, her eyes betraying the fear her voice had managed to conceal. "I don't know," she whispered back, "but he's not getting in." She quickly dialed, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone on the other end, her words a rapid stream of hushed intensity. Later, we pieced together the unsettling truth. One of our distant relatives, a man named Cousin Roy, had spotted us at a nearby grocery store, mundane outing turned sinister. He had promptly and without a second thought, tipped off my parents. Roy had always been my dad's favorite drinking buddy, a loyal confidant in their shared escapism, and apparently, his allegiance to their drunken camaraderie outweighed any concern for our safety. The betrayal stung, a sharp, bitter pain, even though we had never been particularly close to Roy. The relentless pounding continued, accompanied by a chilling stream of increasingly slurred threats and obscenities. Each impact against the door made me flinch violently, a visceral reaction I couldn't control. Each venomous word brought back a flood of horrific memories, moments I had painstakingly tried to suppress, to bury deep within my subconscious. Millie, ever the pragmatic one, had called the building manager, who assured us he was immediately contacting the police. The minutes that followed stretched into an agonizing eternity as we waited, trapped, listening to the unfiltered torrent of my dad's drunken rage reverberating through the thin apartment door. "Your father's hammered," Millie whispered to me, her voice a low murmur. "He's making an absolute scene in front of all the neighbors." There was a strange, grim satisfaction in her voice, a flicker of dark irony. He was, in his drunken fury, inadvertently showing his true colors to strangers, confirming every single accusation and truth we had dared to speak about him. I could only nod, too terrified to speak, my throat constricted with fear. We sat in a tense, frozen silence, absorbing the raw, unhinged hatred spewing from beyond the door. His words, though slurred and jumbled, were imbued with a chilling clarity of pure malevolence. "I know you're in there," he roared, his voice hoarse from shouting. Yet he showed no signs of stopping. "You can't hide from me." I could vividly picture him on the other side of the door, face blotchy and crimson, veins bulging ominously in his forehead. Just as they always did when he was consumed by one of his infamous rages. Then, abruptly, other voices broke through the cacophony, the building manager's more authoritative tones, and then the unmistakable, firm voices of police officers. The shouting abruptly ceased. We heard muffled conversation, the indistinct murmur of voices, followed by the retreating sound of heavy footsteps moving away. The sudden, profound silence that descended was almost as jarring, as unsettling, as the violent pounding had been just moments before. A moment later, a soft, tentative knock replaced the previous assault. "He's gone," the building manager's kind voice called through the door, his tone laced with concern. The police escorted him off the property and issued a trespass warning. "Are you both okay?" His genuine concern, his gentle inquiry after the storm, loosened something tight within me, making my throat tighten even further. A sudden, constricting knot formed in her throat, a choke of raw, unexpected emotion that caught her entirely off guard, making it difficult to even swallow past the lump. "Yes," Millie managed to call back, her voice a fragile whisper against the sudden silence, even as the blood drained from her face, leaving her complexion a stark, ashen white, betraying the lingering terror that still gripped her. A simple, almost inadequate, "thank you" escaped my lips, a soft utterance directed at the retreating figure who had momentarily shielded us. We held our breath, rigid as statues, straining our ears to catch the fading echo of his footsteps as they retreated further and further down the long, impersonal hall, until the silence finally swallowed them whole. Only then, with the last vestige of his presence gone, did either of us dare to stir. The immediate, palpable threat had undoubtedly receded, a storm passing overhead, yet an insidious tendril of fear stubbornly coiled within us, refusing to dissipate entirely. It was a lingering dread, a silent, almost physical weight that still pressed down on the air, making every breath feel heavy, an almost suffocating presence clinging to the very corners of the room. A ghost of the recent confrontation. That same night, under the cloak of deepening shadows, we found ourselves engaged in the familiar, disheartening ritual of packing our meager, essential belongings once more. The rhythm of it had become chillingly routine, a practiced choreography of survival. Every item was scrutinized. What truly constituted an essential when your life was defined by flight? What had to be mercilessly discarded, left behind as forgotten fragments of a past we were desperate to erase? How, precisely, does one vanish without a trace, becoming a phantom in a bustling city? The next morning, a subtle tremor of anxiety still threading through her voice, Millie called in sick to work, fabricating a believable excuse for her sudden absence. By midday, we were already in transit, relocating to a different apartment, tucked away in another, less conspicuous part of the sprawling city location carefully chosen, we hoped, where the relentless search of our parents wouldn't penetrate. This new sanctuary, if it could even be called that, was undeniably even smaller than the last, its walls closing in slightly, but it offered two invaluable, tangible reassurances. A sturdy deadbolt reinforcing the door and a tiny, reassuring peephole, offering a sliver of control over who might approach. These aren't grand luxuries, certainly not, but these small, almost insignificant comforts, these meager fortifications against the outside world, felt like everything to us, embodying a nascent sense of security we hadn't known in far too long. We can't keep running forever, can we? I voiced the gnawing fear aloud, the question hanging heavy between us as we began the dreary task of unpacking in the cramped, unfamiliar space. Cardboard boxes, stark and silent witnesses, formed a desolate perimeter around us, each one a stark reminder that our lives had, yet again, been ruthlessly stripped down to their bare, most basic essentials. This relentless, constant movement, this perpetual state of flux, was utterly exhausting body and soul, weary from the ceaseless displacement. And the vigilance, the unyielding need to constantly look over our shoulders, to scrutinize every shadow and every unfamiliar face, was utterly draining, leaving us hollowed out. "We won't have to," Millie promised, her voice laced with a conviction I yearned to share, her words a soothing balm against my anxiety. "They'll give up eventually." As she spoke, she carefully arranged a few mismatched mugs in the sparse kitchen cabinet, her hands moving with a deliberate slowness, a small, hopeful attempt to conjure some semblance of normalcy, to carve out a sliver of home in this dark, anonymous apartment. But a deep-seated doubt gnawed at me, a persistent whisper of dread. I wasn't so sure. My dad's fury, a force of nature I knew all too well, had always been a relentless, unforgiving torrent, a consuming fire that never truly died down. And now, weren't we acutely aware of what we had done? We hadn't justified him. We had publicly humiliated him, stripped away his carefully constructed facade, made him lose face and, undoubtedly, the faith of his closest friends. his respected colleagues, his entire community. Could he ever forgive such an affront? The very people who had once regarded him with deference and admiration now, I imagined, surely exchanged knowing glances and hushed whispers behind his back, their words like daggers. His monumental pride, his very identity, simply wouldn't allow such an egregious betrayal to stand unchallenged. 2 long, unsettling months after our relocation to the new apartment, a quiet buzz from my phone shattered the fragile peace of the evening. It was a single, unexpected text message from Evan. My heart lurched, a mixture of trepidation and a flicker of something akin to hope. The words were stark, brief, yet potent. You were right. I'm sorry. I stared at the illuminated screen for what felt like an eternity, my thumb hovering tentatively, almost magnetically, over the reply button. Caught in a silent battle of conflicting impulses. The timestamp, a stark digital reminder, read to 17 a.m. a message dispatched in the deep, vulnerable quiet of the middle of the night, perhaps born from a sudden, stark moment of self-aware clarity, or a profound, crushing wave of regret, an awakening in the dark. A powerful, insistent part of me yearned to respond immediately, to reach out, to ask if he was truly okay, if he was safe. Could I dare to extend an invitation, to tell him that he, too, could join us, could find refuge if he also longed to escape the suffocating shadow of our past? The image of the brother I cherished from a distant, happier childhood, the one who would gently tuck blankets around me on chilly nights, whispering assurances that I was beautiful. Precious still stubbornly persisted, a small, flickering flame somewhere deep within the angry, misguided young man he had so dramatically transformed into. I desperately wanted to reach that fragile, buried essence of him, to extend to him the very same lifeline, the same unwavering support and sanctuary that Millie had so selflessly offered to me. Yet another, more pragmatic and profoundly wounded part of me vividly recalled the painful trajectory of his transformation, how insidiously he had morphed into a chilling replica, a mini-me of our father, echoing his anger and control. The memory burned, sharp and acrid, of how he had stood by, a silent, complicit witness to my suffering, observing the abuse without ever lifting a finger, without uttering a single word of protest. Worse still, how he had actively participated, eagerly contributing his own bitter cruelty to the already toxic brew, amplifying the pain. The visceral image of pasta flying from his mouth, a grotesque splatter against the kitchen wall, as he unleashed a torrent of furious screams at Millie, remained searingly vivid in my mind. A brutal tableau still capable of eliciting a fresh wave of pain. With a heavy heart, and a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, I deleted the message, leaving it unanswered, the digital silence a stark finality. Perhaps, I conceded, one distant day I might find the capacity within myself to forgive him, to truly help him find his own path to freedom and healing. But not yet, not now. The emotional wounds, raw and tender, were still far too fresh, too unhealed, to even contemplate such an immense act of grace. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the suffocating grip of the nightmares began to loosen, their terrifying visitations becoming less frequent, fading from a nightly torment to sporadic disturbances. It was a slow, arduous process of reclaiming my sleep, my peace of mind. I tentatively embarked on a journey of therapy, a crucial step towards healing, funded through a combination of Millie's unwavering, selfless support and the modest income I earned from a part-time job I secured at a local bookstore. The hushed quietude of the bookstore environment, permeated by the comforting scent of old paper and fresh ink, proved to be an unexpected sanctuary, perfectly suiting my still fragile state. The sight of orderly rows upon rows of books, neatly categorized and predictably arranged, offered a strange, deeply comforting sense of control and stability in a world that had so recently felt utterly chaotic and unpredictable. Slowly but surely, I began to forge tentative connections, making a few new friends at school, small beacons of normalcy in my reconstructed life. And, crucially, the automatic, instinctual flinch that had once seized my body whenever someone raised their voice, even in casual conversation, began to recede. A reflexive fear slowly giving way to a newfound resilience. These weren't grand, earth-shattering triumphs, no, but they were undeniably small victories, each one a profound and meaningful marker of my gradual, hard-won healing. Then, one ordinary day, a striking realization dawned upon me, startling in its simplicity. I wasn't wearing my mother's necklace anymore. The small, cold weight of the chain against my skin was conspicuously absent. What was even more remarkable, almost disquieting, was my complete inability to recall when I had taken it off, or even where I might have carelessly placed it. It felt, in an almost visceral way, like a profound, liberating shedding, an unconscious act of severance. This was it, wasn't it, the severing of the very last, tangible chain that had tenuously tethered me to that oppressive house, to that suffocating past. That small, gleaming gold heart, once meticulously polished and worn with a profound sense of its importance, had for so long seemed a precious, almost sacred object, a rare, coveted token of affection from a woman who was notoriously, almost heartbreakingly, stingy with her emotional expression. But now, with the clear-eyed perspective of distance and healing, it seemed exactly for what it truly was, a cheap, mass-produced trinket, a hollow bauble cynically offered as a bribe. A silent payment intended to purchase my silence and ensure my quiet, obedient compliance. Millie, ever observant, with her keen, empathetic gaze, noticed the subtle yet profound transformation unfolding within me as well. "You stand taller now," she remarked one quiet evening, her voice soft with a mixture of pride and affection. "You truly look people in the eye." We were standing side by side at the kitchen sink, the warm water swirling around our hands as we washed dishes, a shared, mundane task that, surprisingly, felt utterly peaceful. This simple, everyday chore, once potentially fraught with unspoken anxieties, was now utterly transformed into a moment of serene connection, cleansed by the palpable absence of the suffocating tension and ever-present fear that had once permeated our every interaction. I couldn't help but smile, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. "I learned from the best," I retorted playfully, letting the warmth of her compliment wash over me. The unexpected praise, however, made her duck her head, a blush rising subtly to her cheeks as she feigned embarrassment, though a visible, pleased glint danced in her eyes, betraying her quiet joy. As the weeks bled into months, marking the steady passage of time, the insistent messages from my parents, once relentless and demanding, began to wane. Their frequency dwindled, like a fading signal, until, blessedly, they ceased altogether, leaving behind a profound, almost eerie silence. The very last message I received, a final, poignant plea from my mom, was heartbreakingly simple, yet laden with a universe of unaddressed pain. "I hope someday you'll forgive us." I read the words, letting them settle. But just as with Evan's message, I chose not to respond. The prospect of forgiveness, I knew, might indeed blossom someday, a fragile bloom in the aftermath of so much wreckage. But if it did, it would be a choice entirely on my terms, orchestrated by my own readiness, not dictated by their desperate need for absolution. It would be a profoundly personal act, emerging from a deep, internal willingness to finally let go of the crushing weight of the pain, to release myself from its shackles, rather than an undeserved granted pardon simply because they felt they had earned it. On the momentous one-year anniversary of the day I had bravely walked away from home, leaving behind the suffocating confines of my past, Millie, with her characteristic thoughtfulness, surprised me after dinner. She presented a small, unassuming cake, its appearance far from fancy, just a simple, humble chocolate confection, a single, slender candle stuck resolutely in its rich, dark center. Yet, this unpretentious gesture, imbued with such profound meaning, was enough to bring a sudden, unexpected wellspring of tears to my eyes, blurring my vision. "What's this for?" I managed to ask, my voice thick with emotion, as the tiny flame wavered ever so slightly in the still air between us, casting a warm, flickering glow on her kind, radiant face. "Your Independence Day," she declared, her smile luminous, her eyes shining with an almost fierce pride. "1 year of freedom," she emphasized, her gaze meeting mine, and in that shared look, I saw a reflection of her pride, not just for me, for the immense strides I had made, but for us, for the incredible resilience and courage we had both summoned, for everything we had painstakingly accomplished together against overwhelming odds. With a deep breath, I leaned forward and gently blew out the single candle, watching the smoke curl upwards. As it vanished, I made a silent, fervent wish, a whispered hope for countless more years just like this one, years imbued with the profound peace of safety, the exhilarating journey of growth, the ongoing balm of healing years where I could finally, truly, become the authentic person I was always meant to be, rather than the terrified, cowering girl I had been unjustly forced to be. The very next day, propelled by this potent sense of renewed purpose and freedom, I sat down at my computer, my fingers poised over the keyboard. This time, as I began to type a new post, the narrative wasn't steeped in the raw, aching depths of trauma. Instead, it was a testament to healing, an exploration of the incredible strength one could unearth in the aftermath of abuse, a detailed guide to meticulously building a vibrant, new life from the scattered, desolate ashes of the old one. The words, unlike before, flowed with an effortless grace, pouring forth not from a place of lingering pain, but from a reservoir of hard-won wisdom, each sentence imbued with profound insight. I titled it, with defiant pride, "The Voice They Couldn't Silence," and with a decisive click, I hit publish. A wave of profound, liberating realization washed over me. My story, once a weapon in their arsenal, no longer belonged to them. It belonged unequivocally to me. The sheer, unadulterated power of that acknowledgement settled over me like a perfectly woven, warm blanket, enveloping me in a cocoon of comfort and unshakable security. I leaned back in my chair, a serene smile gracing my lips, watching with a mixture of awe and satisfaction as the view count on my newly published post began its astonishing climb. Within mere hours, it had already soared into the thousands. Comments, a tidal wave of shared human experience, poured in without cessation. Some were from fellow survivors, courageously sharing their own, intensely personal stories of struggle and resilience, creating a powerful, unspoken chorus of solidarity. Others offered heartfelt words of unwavering support and encouragement, their digital presence a warm embrace. A few, eager and empathetic, even inquired about practical ways they could assist friends or loved ones trapped in similar, harrowing situations, seeking actionable advice. It felt incredibly profound, almost miraculous. To witness my deeply personal pain was a source of unbearable anguish, transformed into something tangible and meaningful. Something that might actually, genuinely help others navigate their own dark passages. "You're trending," Millie announced, her voice filled with unconcealed excitement, as she peered enthusiastically over my shoulder at the glowing screen. "How does it feel?" She rested. Her hand, warm and firm, rested gently on my shoulder, a simple gesture, yet one that, in a not-so-distant past, would have triggered an involuntary flinch, a recoiling instinct born of fear and uncertainty. Now, however, it settled naturally, a welcome weight affirming a new, profound sense of safety and belonging. It was undeniably comforting, a quiet reassurance that resonated deep within me. I offered a slight shrug, a subtle acknowledgement of a complex tangle of emotions I struggled to articulate. Not sure how to put it into words, I murmured, the paradox swirling, weird, good. Weird, I think. How, indeed, could one neatly package this intricate, almost contradictory blend of vulnerability and nascent power? This strange alchemy where profound exposure unexpectedly begat an exhilarating freedom. It was a paradox that defied easy explanation, a transformation so fundamental it felt both alien and utterly right. Just then, my phone vibrated softly, a gentle hum against my thigh, a notification. Another comment on my recent, intensely personal post. This one, I noticed, was considerably longer than the usual brief affirmations. A prickle of curiosity, mixed with a familiar pang of apprehension, spurred me to click and expand the text, wondering what insights or judgments this unknown stranger might offer about the very fabric of my exposed life. The words unfurled on the screen, raw and unvarnished. I never told anyone what happened in my house. Reading your story made me realize I'm not crazy. I'm showing this to my school counselor tomorrow. Thank you. The unadorned simplicity of that message struck me with the force of a physical blow, a wave of fresh, cleansing tears stinging the back of my eyes. It wasn't sadness, but an overwhelming rush of catharsis, of profound validation. Here, in this quiet digital space, was undeniable proof someone else would find the courage to seek help, to break their own silence, simply because I had found the bravery to speak mine. My throat tightened, a physical manifestation of the emotion constricting my chest. This is why I did it, I whispered, the words barely audible, my voice thick with a mixture of awe and relief, as I turned the phone to show Millie the comment. This, then, was the profound purpose that had unexpectedly bloomed from the fertile, painful soil of my past, to morph into the very voice I had so desperately yearned to hear during those interminable years when I felt utterly trapped, utterly silent, suffocating in a darkness I believed was mine alone. Millie responded with a gentle, reassuring squeeze on my shoulder, her touch a silent acknowledgement of the weight of the moment. You're braver than I was at your age, she said, her voice husky, thick with a deep, resonating pride that warmed me to my core. That's not true, I countered immediately, shaking my head. You stood up to them when no one else would, when it felt like the entire world had turned its back. I turned my full attention to her, my gaze sweeping over the face of this extraordinary sister who had, in every conceivable way, saved me, rescuing my spirit, my sanity, my very future. And look where it got us, she said with a soft, knowing half-smile, her arms sweeping broadly around our modest, yet beloved apartment. The space itself was undeniably small, a snug haven carved out of a bustling city, but it was perpetually bathed in a generous, golden light. It was a living tapestry woven with stacks of well-loved books, verdant, thriving plants, and an eclectic collection of small, quirky treasures we had unearthed and cherished together. No explosive shouting shattered the peace here. No insidious fear gnawed at the edges of our days. No exhausting need to walk on eggshells, ever vigilant against unseen dangers. Exactly, I affirmed, the single word brimming with an understanding so deep it transcended language, a quiet triumph ringing in the air.